As we're in the summer months right now, it provides a great opportunity for you as a ministry leader to take opportunities to rest before the fall ministry calendar kicks off. So, whether that is maybe you're taking a sabbatical right now, or maybe it's that you're just trying to find some intentional rhythms to rest before a peak season is coming in the next few weeks. Whatever it is for you, I think today's conversation with my friend Mark Dance will help you. Mark has been doing ministry for 3+ decades now. He is connected with us back in our time at Long Hollow and now serves as executive director in Arkansas. And I am excited for our conversation because we're just going to talk practically on what does it look like to Sabbath well? Why do we not rest? How do we rest well? And at the very end, we actually talk about if you've never had a sabbatical, how do you ask for that to your leadership in a way that helps them champion it for you, not just give you permission? So, super excited for our conversation today with Mark Dance. Let's jump in. Mark Dance, welcome to the podcast. And so glad that you're here. I'll let you introduce
Thank you.
yourself a little bit more beyond that Arkansas and Dallas in just a sec, but excited because Mark is actually a friend of ours all the way from a Long Hollow days when you were in Nashville. And so we were joking. I think Robbie has introduced you as everything under the sun. You've been such a good friend for us. And then also in Replicate, we've got to do several things together. Excited for our conversation today about what it looks like to rest well and to lead well. And so, Mark, share just a little bit. You can share about Arkansas and the Dallas Cowboys that's behind you. I'll let you start there, but then tell us a little bit more about what you're up to today.
Yeah, so if you're listening on the audio only, I do have a Dallas Cowboy helmet and an Arkansas football behind me. Is kind of born in Dallas and third generation and raised in Tyler, Texas, but born a second time in Arkansas. And I got to pastor a church here for 14 years. And now I get to pastor a whole state. I'm just really 7 months into my new role as executive director here and love it. Love it. I love the folks here. And it was such a blessing when I worked at Lifeway to be a part of the Long Hollow family and to see Replicate reaching out, discipling, and pastoring pastors. That legacy is huge. And Vic, you're doing a great job moving it forward.
I appreciate it. It's excited for our conversation today because so much of what we get to talk about today is what does it look like, not just to lead well, but to also rest well. And so right now, as this podcast goes live, we're in the midst of the summer. A lot of times summer becomes that season where we're able to kind of slow down. A lot of times our family ministry people are probably like, absolutely not. We're in the heat of it. But our lead
Yeah.
pastor, executive pastor, sometimes we'll use July as a time to slow down before the fall ramps back up. And so I'm excited for our conversation today to talk about what does it look like to rest well? What is Sabbath? What does practicing Sabbath look like? And for our people, as we think through our listeners and just how we often are leading, we talk about this so much about the spiritual renewal. If we as leaders aren't healthy, if we're not at a place where between us and God and at a healthy place, we can't multiply and lead our church well. And so excited for the conversation today. Love to kind of I was actually in prep for this, was looking at some of the Lifeway research, which you know it way better than I am, Mark, both from your past experience and just your focus around this. But over half of pastors, like I think anywhere from 55 to 75, talk about being frequently overwhelmed, talk about being overcommitted and overworked, and talk often about not having a good rhythm of sabbatical. And I'm just curious, like, we see the state, and I resonate with that. Like, I think I would be part of those that feel that.
Yeah.
Why is that something that is so prevalent in the church today?
Yeah. Well, for pastors in general, ministers, any believer believes the Bible. We believe the 10 Commandments. We're not here to sell you on the Sabbath, man. It's right there. It's
Yeah,
in the open
it's all.
pages of God's word. So we're just going to start with assume that it's a great idea, right?
Right.
God modeled it in Genesis. He commanded it in Exodus. He also practiced it as Jesus often did. And in fact, so much that the Pharisees criticized him more about Sabbath than anything else. 6 different times they came at it. You're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. And I don't want this to be that kind of podcast or book to where you feel more guilt. But at the same time, it's still a commandment. And I don't think we have a hard time believing it's true. But to your point, and I share that pain, we have a hard time practicing it and giving ourselves permission to do what God's already told us to do. So I'm hoping that the book will help folks, whether you're listening to this this summer or if you download it and listen to it later and like, oh, dang, I missed that opportunity. Summer's over. No, no, no. This is more than a vacation.
That's
Um,
right.
it's even more than a 24 hours. It is a 24-hour. Day means day. Stop means stop. That's what Sabbath means. It's all
Yeah.
always and ever meant one thing: stop.
Yeah. What is so tell me a little bit like that idea there. We believe it. Like I find myself in that place. So like I'll just kind of confess, like totally know that's one of the 10 commandments. I was reading through Exodus, like I'm in it right now. And it's like it's right there. I know it. And if I'm honest, it's probably the command that when I break, I feel the least bad about it.
Yeah,
That I
yeah,
feel like I don't feel as much remorse now. I'll feel it way in the future, but in the
yeah.
moment I don't. What is that gap between knowing it but then seeing so few pastors actually practicing it? What do you attribute that to?
Well, 2 things, uh, pride and applause. Um, pride in that you can assume that this is something that everybody else needs that you don't. I don't need it. Or pride to think that I can't pull off something that God's told me to do. And so I've heard, as I've spoken on this at different conferences and written about it in different places, I've heard every excuse out there. Well, but you know, you don't know my situation. I'm bivocational, trivocational, or I have 3 preschoolers. I mean, we can't all do it maybe the exact same way in each season of life in every setting. But as far as I can tell, there aren't exemptions in there for or exceptions in there. It is literally how we're hardwired. And so pride says, I'm smarter than God is. And so this is not something you have to pray about, whether you're going to do it. We just need to pray about how to do it. The other side of that coin, applause, is of those commandments, the only one, Vic, that you're going to get any applause for doing is breaking the Sabbath. In fact, we get addicted to members, coworkers, people like the harder we work, the longer we are, and the more we break this, you know, the more people like it. And we brag about it sometimes, which is poor discipleship on our part. And so because everybody in our ministry, whether we're ministering to other ministers or ministering to believers, new believers, mature, everyone's struggling with the whole work-life balance. And so we can take the guilt away and say, hey, this is not just for some people. This is for everybody. And it's not just a command, it's also a gift that God calls a delight. And so this isn't something that he's trying to beat us up with. He's like, hey, I want you to work hard. All of you, you know, action biased people like us, work hard, run hard, then stop.
And what do you feel like like you mentioned sabbatical, like it's a season, it's a one day, like when we're talking about sabbatical here and we're thinking like tell us just a little bit more what that is, but then what are maybe some of the misconceptions around sabbatical as we step into this conversation today? What are some of the common misconceptions that you see around this?
Well, you're asking about sabbatical, and which is different than Sabbath.
It's good.
Sabbath is a 24-hour cease and desist order that God says will dedicated to rest and worship. It's a weekly discipline. Sabbatical, which comes from the same word, is something that very few pastors will ever experience. So if you don't get a sabbatical, don't feel bad about it. Most don't. And those who do have different ways of practicing it. It's wonderful if you can get it. And in the book, I've dedicated a whole chapter about how to ask for and apply your first sabbatical. And so I actually wrote this book, Rest Well, Lead Well, during one of those sabbaticals. And that was a, so I rested, I stopped, I didn't preach, and I had people cover for me. And I dedicated the time to rest and also to write and just recharge. But that actually the discipline of sabbatical, there's sabbatical for the land, jubilee, etcetera, but there's not a lot of people who in the scripture that you see practicing a sabbatical. And so the principle of Sabbath can be applied not only in the 24-hour whenever you start and finish that 24-hour period is, the Bible says don't obsess about the day. Don't argue about the day. All right. Just make sure it happens. We all have different schedules. Um, but every day we also need to practice Sabbath by resting in the presence of the Lord, what most people would refer to as a quiet time. What Robbie and I came to understand, we used to using old school language of sacred office, whatever you want to call it. Every day, the most important appointment you have, of course, is with Jesus because he's our first love. And these are just great commandment principles. So Jesus is first. Janet is my second covenant. She's the second priority. And if I get those two bases covered, then I don't really need anybody else's applause. But I have to actually work hard to make sure that every day I stop and rest in the presence of the Lord and recharge there. And also with my wife. And then when I go to bed, it's another type of Sabbath. I have a whole chapter about sleep and rest. Because that too is how we're all wired. Not some wired that way, all wired that we need rest and about the same 7 to 8 hours as everybody else does.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple of these. What are these rhythms of rest that you talk through? I mean, it seems like there's a daily one, a weekly one. Like what are some of those key rhythms of rest that for leaders to lead well need to practice?
Yeah, so just in my my motive, I think, for writing this book was that I did it poorly. For 20 years, I was the hard charging, great commission pastor that I always wanted to be, and the church was growing and the kingdom was growing, but I wasn't growing. I got to the point I did not practice Sabbath at all. And so I confused neglecting myself with denying myself. And there's a huge distinction between those two. And when I got into a kind of a mental health cul-de-sac where I was completely depleted, and I got help for that. But I also had to change my habits to where every week I was taking a day off. I was making that happen. If I needed to do something, a wedding, a funeral, something on my conventional day off, I would just change it to another or use two half. But I would never. It's never the struggle doesn't go away till we get that ultimate Sabbath rest in the presence of God in heaven, right? But then during the week, there are opportunities. I mentioned the quiet time, but even during the day, you know, uh, you hit the wall in the afternoon. Sometimes maybe in the middle of the morning, and your brain's just fried, and like we're sometimes as ministers, we're like chain smokers with a cell phone or connected. It's like one conversation to the other, one meeting after the other. So I started to plan my day differently, Vic. One of the ways is that I would put the study of God's word on the front end of my week so that I dedicated myself to prayer and the ministry of the word, like they said in Acts. When they stopped doing it, they stopped growing, the church stopped growing. So it just makes sense that if you dedicate yourself to prayer and the ministry of the word, you're going to grow, the church's going to grow, right?
Right.
So front ending that kept a lot of the pressure off the back end of the week or into the weekend. That also meant that changed the other things, responsibilities I had during the week. I would organize my life so that I stopped having breakfast meetings, for example. After God got hold of my attention, what I called in start to finish, the prequel to this, a face mask moment, when the great commandment came alive, was like I looked at my calendar, I was like, man, I'm having all these meetings before I meet with Jesus.
Yeah.
And then during the day, I'm going from meeting to meeting, call to call, email to email, never stopping to just take a breath.
Right.
And stopping is exactly what Sabbath is. It's just stop. Enjoy the presence
Mm,
of the Lord, take a breath, take a walk, you know,
yeah.
and, instead of rushing through life, walk through as if you're not in control because you're not. It takes a lot of faith to practice Sabbath, man. It sounds like an easy deal, but as you and I both know, man, this is so much easier for us to talk about on this podcast than it is for
That's
us to
right.
practice.
That's right, and I think and as I was looking at the book and just some of the work that you're doing there, I think you talked so much about it's the struggle is not it's not a time management as much as it's a trust issue.
Yeah.
And I think that to me resonated deeply because it's like I can time manage. I can find a way to optimize a calendar, and in
Mhm.
fact, I think that's usually what keeps me from Sabbath. Is I'm like, how do I make the most of today? How do I maximize my rest? Except it's not restful, you know. And so I
Yeah.
think I can often try to be more productive, but really the heart level is that issue. Can you share more of just kind of where you've seen it, not necessarily as a time management, but really it's a trust issue that often holds us back?
Yeah. A trust issue and a discipleship issue. The trust is that I have to remind myself sometimes of what John the Baptist is, the king of one-liners, the one he said the most often, or at least recorded most often, and the one that I need to say in the mirror most often is, "I am not the Christ." Once I've established that, then I don't have to strive whether I'm executive director of something or pastor of something or whatever God's given me to do, the father, husband that I want to be. Instead of stress pastoring, I can just rest in the presence of God, do the best I can, and let Him be God and let me not be God. Because at the end of the day, every shepherd is a sheep
Yeah,
who needs rest and needs to be recharged. And Jesus said, "Hey, come to me.
that's right.
Just come to me.
Yeah,
You're weary? Yeah, I get it. It's exhausting. It's a very exhausting job. If you're weary
yeah,
and burdened, come to me and I will give you rest."
that's right.
So, not just stopping to have a quiet time at the beginning of the day or waiting for a full day Sabbath, but during the day, taking time to stop, breathe, thank God, and just give your brain and your heart a break.
Mm, yeah. So, yeah, what do you say in the because obviously with all your ministry years experience, what does that practically look like in the peak seasons of ministry? Because I
Yeah.
think I feel funerals, hospital visits, like Sunday's always coming. I feel like in ministry, there's just these peak seasons where rest just feels impossible.
Yeah.
What does it
Absolutely.
look like practically to practice those rest rhythms?
Yeah. Well, to show you, yeah, peak seasons and sprints, ministry sprints are going to happen. They happened to Jesus. They happened to the disciples. That's why when they woke him up, Jesus up in the boat in the middle of the storm, you know why he was asleep? Because he was tired. Just read the chapter before that. His cousin just got beheaded and he's fed all these people and he's got all this stuff going on. And he's like, dude's tired. And,
Yeah.
he got up, he rebuked them and then rebuked the waves. And it's like, man, I've been there. I just want to rebuke everybody. And these are, these are, these are kind of little signs that when my fuse gets short, and I'm not saying Jesus lost his temper. I'm just
Yeah.
saying that when my fuse gets short, I look at my calendar and go, when's the last time I took a day off? When's the last Sunday I didn't preach? Right. And and so when the sprints come, because sometimes you get a pile of funerals you can't see around you didn't see coming, or conflict happens, or something weighty at home, prodigal, kid, something happens, and don't panic, don't go into legalistic mode. But if that sprint is still going on a few weeks later, a few months later, it's not a sprint, it's a lifestyle. And, Deuteronomy 22:4, Jesus quoted a couple times in Luke 14 and Matthew 12, but he says, if you see a brother's donkey or ox falling down the road, don't ignore it, help him lift it up. So when the Pharisees started criticizing him about working on Sunday, Jesus said, hey, if your ox falls in the well, won't you pull them out, or in Matthew, if it's the sheep that falls in the pit. But I like the Deuteronomy version because the donkey, because I in this story, if you're always rescuing a donkey in the ditch, in this story, you need to see that you're the donkey in the ditch. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, I don't have to rescue everybody. I don't have to answer every call, text, and
Mm,
and direct message, as they come.
yeah.
In fact, I disciple people when I don't,
Mm,
because it's never gonna stop. It's never
mm,
gonna get better. There are more ways to reach out to you, than any other time, and when you drop everything and hit it back, what you're doing is you're telling them how to live their life, which is not biblical, it's not sustainable. But when a sprint happens, then just know it does. Remember, it's gonna happen sometimes. The disciples were too busy even to eat. Remember that passage? And I've been there, but if that's normal, then something's
yeah.
wrong.
I,
You
I
got
love the idea that you're helping can actually be hurting them. And I think it doesn't just hurt you, it hurts your family, but it
Yeah.
also hurts the person that you're trying to help because they become dependent on you. I think that's such a like there's so much to that leadership principle when it comes to how do we develop other leaders? How do we disciple our people? And so I love that. Hey, church leader, I hope these podcast episodes and the Movement Ready Church book that Robbie and I have written are helping you get disciple making started in your church. What I'm excited for in the next season is that we're taking the Movement Ready Church book to your church. We are doing one-day workshops where myself or one of the navigators on our Replicate team come on site to your church and work with your staff and leaders to take the principles of this book and to put it into action. What I love about this workshop is that we're not going to do just trainings from the book, but we are actually going to help you create something personal for your church. We're going to give every one of your leaders some essential training to grow as disciple makers and to be a developer of leaders. Secondly, we're going to give you a personalized assessment of your disciple making culture. And then thirdly, we're going to create a 1-year focus and a first step to get started so that you can see your movement begin. So all you have to do is go to movementreadytraining.com to get more information and to get started. You'll see it's pretty simple. Let's jump on a call together. Let's create a personalized training day for your church, and then let our team take care of the rest. And we will bring the Movement Ready Church to your church. So just go to movementreadychurchtraining.com and let's get your movement started. Now, let's get back to our conversation together. What you kind of mentioned there, some like your temper when it gets short. What are some of maybe the other warning signs when you see a leader that's kind of moved from, let's say, just a healthy, driven leader to one that maybe is running now at an unsustainable pace? What are some of those warning signs that you see?
Yeah, so when you start to get drained, and there's no credentialed institution that says this is what burnout is. So burnout is one of those general junk drawer terms that has no line to it. Now,
Mm,
depression, there's a whole industry. You can't say depression without it being a clinical diagnosis. You can't diagnose yourself. But
mm,
burnout is one of those, well, I'm feeling the burn of burnout, or I'm
all right.
not sleeping well at night would be one of those. And if you're not sleeping well, that might lead to insomnia might lead to paranoia. And then you're thinking, hey, why did that person looking at me that way? And then isolation can happen. These are some of the things like where you're avoiding people because you've run out of juice. And it takes people, whether you're introvert, extrovert, or ambivert, like I am, it takes energy to be with people.
Right.
And so if your energy level's low, if then you're gonna have to plug in and recharge just like your phone does. And to
Right.
do that, sometimes you gotta go on the airplane mode, and people, it's amazing what they can do without you. But the discipleship aspect that we talked about, I practice that just today. I mean, I pastor, I went to lunch with yesterday, great lunch, and he texted me right about, you know, like after 9 o'clock. And I say, "Hey, man, enjoyed lunch. This was great." Just a courtesy text like that. And I was almost by the time I saw it, it was it was already 10 o'clock. And I was like, I could text him back. No, that's not good discipleship. And so the next morning when I woke up, I'm like 6 o'clock. So, well, no, I'm not going to text him then either. And so I waited till 8 o'clock. Well, the reason I'm doing that is one, I don't need his applause. And
Mhm.
two, this was an opportunity to show him boundaries.
That's
Not to
right.
rebuke him, just to try to be a positive role model to say, "Yeah, there are times when I'm working, and there's times when I'm not."
Yeah. Well, I think, and we end up, at least I know for myself, it's easy even to respond in those moments where it's like, "Oh, it's my day off," or whatever, and, "Oh, what's this mean?" But, like, what it does in programming people to know when they can talk and what they can expect to you, like, I love the idea of the boundaries you set, and it's not just for you, again, the discipleship of those around you, and so that's really good. You said something earlier, I wanna come back to the idea of sabbatical, it being something different.
Yeah,
And so I'd be curious. I want to kind of tackle it from two lenses. One, maybe the person who, well, I'm gonna take it back. I'd like to ask you kind of three kind of questions around that. When do people you feel like, man, hey, a sabbatical is something that you probably need in this season? When can you take a check and say, hey, pastor, yeah, it's time. Let's find a sabbatical for you. When is that?
yeah, right away, right away. So there's 2 kinds of sabbaticals, basically, and I'm just in my opinion, okay,
Yeah.
is one, there's the intervention kind. That is like you waited until you're that grumpy pants,
Mhm.
you did something or you're just burnt out and everybody can see it but you and like this is intervention. We're gonna suggest, like you don't want to wait till then.
Right.
The prevention side, the proactive side
Mm,
is to say, I want to be a better pastor and I need to keep growing. I don't just make disciples, I need to be discipled. And
mm,
I need to be poured into. And so sometimes during sabbatical, you can schedule time with people that pour into you or have projects or both that um, you know, I think will be helpful to the long term of your ministry. And if your church doesn't have any experience with sabbatical, you've got to start there to not only show them how this benefits you as a minister, but how it benefits them as a church. And again, I've laid out a whole chapter because I'm
sure.
asked it so many times about how do you apply for your first sabbatical. And so if you're healthy and things are going well at church, that's the best time to talk about sabbatical, not
Sure.
when you're downstream, trying to
Mm.
figure out how to get out of a problem.
Yeah. What are the like what are a couple of those key things if I am wanting to talk about it, like, hey, I want to get a sabbatical. I want to bring this to my elders or my deacons or whoever that may be. What
Yeah.
are some of those things that you coach people on to say, man, here's what that looks like to try to get a first sabbatical at your church or for your pastorate?
Yeah, well, one of the first thing and maybe the most important is find someone who will advocate for you. You don't need to spend a lot of time selling this for yourself. Even though it benefits pastors that will come after you or others that are on staff, it still can come across to most people in your church will never ever have a sabbatical option unless you just have a ton of professors that are tenured, right? And so you're asking for something that they don't understand and that they will never get. So, you need to find someone that can speak on your behalf, then you have to tell them what you're doing and help them, basically do their homework for them and then be patient. But one of the other things is costs money, and it also you have to have your bases covered while you're gone. So that takes planning and time. So no matter how the ecclesiology is set up in your church, make sure you get blessing, if not permission, on all the above to say, I have a plan and this is how it benefits the church, and this is how I'm covering the bases while I'm gone. And I said to my own staff in churches that I've initiated this in 2 churches, and so I would tell them, if you're coming up on whatever, see, 5 years, 7 years, whatever, then you need to put it in the budget for that year. Because if you're asking for a sabbatical in the middle of a budget year, what you're doing is you're putting a huge limelight on that issue where everyone's, you know, weighing in on something. But if you put it in the course of a budget, it not only is planned better, but also it becomes part of a larger conversation about the church and what church needs instead of just, hey, this is, then everyone's weighing in on it looking like a paid
Yeah.
vacation.
That makes total sense. What would you say to the person who that says, "Hey, why do you need a sabbatical? I don't get a sabbatical." To the person, the business leader, and those in the congregation, what's the response to that as a good pastor of those people? How do you handle that moment?
Well, first of all, I check your attitude to make sure that there's no entitlement. You don't deserve a Sabbath. All right. There's no church that owes you a Sabbath. So anything you get is a grace of God, and be super grateful for it and be ready for them to say no, or maybe you're paving the way for an ask later on. And so and it might be that you start I would suggest you start with a shorter time frame. Don't just go in to a church that's never had one and ask for 3 months. Just help them take the first steps and build on it after that, where it becomes normal, right? And so, in having that conversation, making sure they understand that this does benefit me as your pastor. This is me investing in this is you investing in me as a person, but also more importantly, in your ministry. And and if you have any designs, thoughts, nudges, hints that you might be leaving that ministry, that God may be moving you somewhere else, then don't even start the process. Because the worst thing you can do for all the people that follow you is to take a sabbatical and then leave the church right afterwards. And so they have to see, or at least have an idea of how it benefits the church and the kingdom and you, because you want to finish well. Almost everybody in leadership, even lay leaders, have a pastor or minister that they've seen crash and burn.
Right.
And so if you show them this is me trying to you know finish well, to
Yeah.
start well, stay well, finish well, as Godstone says, then I'm asking you to invest in that process, which will be a blessing to you, but it'll also be a blessing to anywhere else I serve.
Yeah. What is that? I feel like one of the conversations I've had a lot of times with business leaders is I've shown like, hey, this isn't me just like taking off from work. Like
Yeah,
this is a renewing time, and it's one of those times too. Like there's a weight that pastors we carry that business leaders don't. There's
yeah,
one around the spiritual weight, the morality that piece there. There's so much there that is in addition to what many of our business leaders in our congregation face. And
yeah.
so a lot of that is renewal, but it's also planning. And so with that in mind, what is when you think through a sabbatical, like if we have a pastor on here that's like, okay, I'm getting whether it's 1 month, 3 month, what does it look like to use that well? How do you take use a sabbatical well?
Well, what I did is in both those churches, I didn't call it a sabbatical. For one, it's embedded in the word Sabbath, which means stop and implies rest, which that will be easy for people of different levels of maturity and biblical literacy to equate with a vacation. The fact is you are working, and hopefully you don't overwork. In my first sabbatical, that was a mistake I write about in the book, is I met with about a dozen pastors in Dallas and Atlanta area, and I was more exhausted after my sabbatical than before. I was just trying to justify it too much. I needed the rest, but I also needed to I showed them the project, and then when I came back, I preached sermons that were inspired by that, and I made some initiatives that I tied back after I got back. It's like I learned this during my extended time with the Lord. I call it a I think I called it a ministry project because I was just like I'm trying to help them get their heads around it.
Yeah.
And I will say as a word of caution, in my opinion, I would not do any of the comparison that you just mentioned. I wouldn't say try to compare the weight of my job to their job because the fact is they haven't been in your shoes and you haven't been in their shoes. They also experience a lot of pressure and so uh it is what it is. This is something that they uh will probably never have. But again, don't start sounding like you deserve it because that's just not biblically sustainable, and they have hard lives too. So,
It's good.
just go in with a very, very intentional, even over the top sense of gratitude and, be ready for that those that are a little less diplomatic in the way they talk. Be ready for those kinda, hard questions that seem
Yeah.
like and you wanna swing back, and you've got all this scripture, but just be gracious about it. Over time and culture, those early adapters will win the day. The late adapters will catch up or they won't.
It's
Regardless,
good.
you're stewarding your life. And twice in our job description, Vic, and anybody's listening here that's a pastor, deacon, elder, whatever, we all have First Timothy chapter 3, Titus 1. It talks about us managing our lives before we can manage our homes and our churches. We have to manage us. This is us stewarding that call to lead ourselves before we lead our family and ministry.
It's good. I love the lack of entitlement, the humility, the gratitude, love the posture in that. I think that's such a you're elevating that in a way that I think is really powerful, and I think and just so practical. Because what you said, like, how do you lead that? Like, I get that personally, and I'm not the Sabbath guy, and they're like, hey, how in the heck do I have this conversation? So
Yeah.
grateful, not just for this conversation, but for your new book, and so lead well, rest well. Tell us just a little bit why you wrote the book. I know we've obviously talked a lot about it, but why you wrote the book and then where people can get it.
Well, it comes out around the time this podcast does in June. It's available. We're launching it at the Southern Baptist Convention, and so Rest Well, Lead Well is going to be available anywhere books are sold. You can buy them anywhere, digitally or print. It's in hardback. It's also an Audible. This is first book I've actually read
Nice.
myself. That was harder than I thought it'd be, but I wanted it to be from my authentic voice. And so really about any format, it'll be available by the time you hear this. And
Uh,
it's a relatively small book. I prefer to read and write shorter books.
That's
And,
right.
I'm s pra you know, Replicate's done a great job of curating resources that are very positive and very practical, that you
Mm,
don't have to have a PhD to understand them, but, you leave encouraged and, this isn't a Replicate product, but it carries that same, um, weight for me
right.
is that I wanna leave the reader encouraged and with some practical ways to to apply the Sabbath so that, they can finish strong and not just limp through the finish line, but actually
Yeah.
accelerate through it.
Yeah, I love that the practicality behind that because again, we all know it's a command. How do we actually do it? And so, for so many of our listeners that maybe this summer and as you go into the next month is a time you get to exhale, would highly encourage picking up this book, Rest Well, Lead Well, and beginning to put some of these things into practice. And so, grateful, Mark, for your ministry, grateful for long hollow days into now just replicate and Arkansas days. And so, look forward to our next conversation together. If
Thank you, Vic.
this is, you're very, very welcome, man. And if there's been helpful for you, please subscribe, share, and pick up Mark's book around resting well and leading well. Till next time, Mark. Talk soon.
Okay, God bless.